Welcome to What's Law Got to Do With It, presented by PwC, the podcast where we look to the past and present of our guests and what they think about your future. My name's Victoria Toole, and today with my colleague Yana Ford, we are joined by Jonathan Ames. Jonathan is currently the legal editor at The Times. Quite open about saying that you're not a lawyer. So what is your background?
My background is that I fell into legal affairs coverage really having started when I left university at the London Bureau of US News and World Report, which was a very big circulation weekly news magazine in America. It still exists, but mostly online now. And I was in their London Bureau and as a young graduate and was weighing up what to do. And a job was advertised, cub reporter, as we used to call them, job was advertised on the Law Gazette, which was published by the Law Society, the body that then represented and regulated the solicitors in England and Wales. But its weekly publication was had a very high subscription, a high circulation, and was quasi-independent from the Law Society. And they were also at that stage trying to evolve into a more modern publication. So it was a very good time to join. They were spurred by a sudden growth in the trade publications around the trade, in inverted commas, around the legal profession, with the launch of The Lawyer, which was a new weekly publication then, and a really booming market in recruitment advertising. So the Law Gazette which had been a rather staid and very old school style journal, was suddenly spurred to become much more modern and started recruiting proper reporters. So I was one of them. And that's how I started. And I was there for quite a few years, worked my way up and ended up editing it for about 7 or 8 years. And before leaving, and then doing a brief stint or a couple of years stint working for a publishing house in Dubai, where there was a growing interest in legal affairs and the legal profession, and what many Western businesses and Western law firms were moving into Dubai, and a publishing house launched a series of business titles, one of which was legal, and I oversaw that for a couple of years, and then returned and joined The Times. Well, I started writing for The Times, and then joined The Times permanently in about sort of 9 years ago, I think, maybe roughly.
When you were a student, did you have like this interest in the law, or is it just something that?
I mean, I think the thing about the law, no. So the short answer is no. When I was a student, my only interest in the law was avoiding the police, as anyone else was interested in. For the most part. My interest as a student was probably not really for discussion with this podcast, but it was. I did sort of focus on. I did an English degree, and then decided that the only thing I was really qualified to do was become a journalist or a reporter. I had no real. I focused on that from a fairly early age, at university, from fairly early point in university. I was on the university newspaper. So, journalism was there from the start. The law, I mean, the thing about the law is that it covers such a wide area of human life. I mean, the law touches every aspect of human life. So whilst there is the specific area of covering the legal profession, which itself is interesting. I mean, the legal profession in both, in the UK and internationally has evolved and grown considerably over the last 20 odd years, well, longer, for 30 years. So the subject of the legal profession itself is very interesting, but also the law touches all sorts of areas of life. And so you get to write about, I mean, I can see what I've written about in today's paper. There's a multiplicity of subjects of varying interests, so it still keeps you on your toes.
Has that proximity to the law, has it ever given you an urge to want to practice law, or are you happy with the different?
I toyed with the idea of looking at the defamation bar years ago, when I was at the Gazette, was even offered mini pupillage very kindly by the then chairman of the Bar Council, who was a defamation specialist. But in the end, I thought it sounded like too much hard work.
Yes.
And stuck with this career.
Although not, I've read that you commented that you write, when we're talking about hard work, up to 15 stories in a day.
Well, no, maybe not in a day. I do. We do. I mean, modern journalism, I'm sure you're aware, is very different from what it was when I started and what it was like when I started. I mean, the requirements of online publishing, a 24-hour news cycle, all that, but online publishing more specifically means that there's an appetite from our news desk now and for publications for a lost copy. Whereas when I started, you'd write, national newspaper journalists would, focus on a couple of stories a week, maybe, on broadsheet newspapers. But now it's not just me. I mean, I and my colleagues will turn out 2, 3, 4 stories a day.
When it comes to that demand, what does it take for a case to stand out to you?
Human interest, mostly. Yeah. I mean, the detailed or peculiarities or interesting aspects of law can be interesting, but for the most part, it's human interest. So, a litigant who has a good background story or traumatic background story, or is a bit of a celebrity, obviously those I'm afraid are very much the boxes we tick. But also, I suppose the story itself. I mean, if it's a sort of heartstring story, then that's still, that's what news desks are interested in. But I mean, I'm often told pitch stories by lawyers that, pitched as being, significantly important landmark changes in case law, in the way judges are looking at issues. And they can be interesting, but it just, it really does depend on how much of a human interest peg we can get to them.
Did you find it difficult, I suppose, transitioning from ensuring that you probably have something in the next morning's newspaper to ensuring that something could be published online within the space of a few hours? I can't remember. I do so, it's so embedded now what we do. I mean, and to be fair, the internet's been around for a while, quite a long time now. And, we've had a website here for as long as I've been working for the paper. So I haven't worked for this paper when I wasn't website. And I remember launching the website at the Law Gazette. And when we launched it, it was just a facsimile of our weekly publication. Mm-hmm. And to see what they do now, there's been obviously massive advances and evolution. I mean, it is quite, when I look back at it, we thought that the internet then was just a sideshow, really. Mm-hmm. It was a bit of frippery and then print publications would still dominate. I mean, that changed very quickly. Yeah.
Although, I mean, I think print still, maybe it's generational, I assume, but print still has a certain attraction for a lot of people.
I mean, I think I prefer print if I was to purchase a newspaper. I think it's the idea you actually have them.
Well, indeed. I mean, I think there's still many benefits to reading print publications. I mean, at least you can pick and choose what you want to read at your pace, really, as opposed to just having to, things, having to flick through screens. But anyway, I mean, that is arguably a generational issue. But yes, to answer your question, there wasn't really a moment when I thought, my God, this is it's really harder than it used to be. Because it's not. I mean, every method or process of working has its own benefits and difficulties.
you've mentioned this movement to digitalization, and you see it with the likes of the brief. How, with the wealth of information online and available for free, how is it that legal journalism can keep up with that level of digitalization?
Free access relative to paywalls, or what? Sorry.
Yeah, just the free access to information. And then with, we see the likes of lots of publications, the Telegraph or the Guardian, they don't have a full-time legal editors at the minute. So how can legal journalism maybe evolve, or you've done things like being active on Twitter or the introduction of the brief?
I mean, I think newspaper, I mean, to be fair on the Guardian and the Telegraph, I mean, they do have legal correspondence still. But maybe not, as you rightly say, maybe not completely full-time on law. And I still think that my competitors, the opposition, does a good job. I mean, Telegraph and the Guardian both, and indeed the FT, I mean, all do, in their own way cover the law. I mean, I think the issue for the mainstream press relative to professional press is that trying to work out what are mainstream from a national newspaper point of view, what sort of law stories are of interest to our readers is the most difficult thing, or is the balance. I mean, the legal profession trades, there's amazingly, I mean, while they have moved now pretty much all online, I don't think any of them, maybe one of the monthlies still does a print version, but they've moved more or less online, but they're still all there. So there's still a considerable appetite amongst the profession and those who are interested in the law to read about the minutiae of, legal practice. It amazes me sometimes that there's such an appetite. But for the national newspapers, I mean, as I say, we try and just combine the human interest side with developments in the, in jurisprudence, in case law, and in the profession. I mean, I write pretty much across the paper. I mean, I'll do stories for the business sector quite often on city law firms and their structures, on how the legal profession is evolving in terms of its of the actual business structure. So there's now there's legal services companies that are listed on the stock exchange. There are Big Four accountancy firms that are practicing law. There's lots and lots of professional issues that are of interest to either general or business readers. And likewise, there's a lot of very, very, sort of granular issues in the profession that the professional press is still covering. So I think it's still a very lively market.
When it comes to the appetite that you're talking about, do you notice there are certain stories that gain a particular response or reaction from that younger generation of lawyers?
I think the younger generation of lawyers, everyone's pretty much a younger generation relative to me. So, I mean, I think almost. I think when you say younger generation lawyers, I suppose they're more, the thing that I find that we write about in terms of the younger generation lawyers is pay. And in the city, the American law firms are driving these pay wars where they're paying a lot for their their newly qualified lawyers, and the dynamic between young lawyers who are just qualifying and are maybe 25, 26 years old or whatever they are, maybe even a bit younger if they're whiz kids, and suddenly being presented with nearly £200,000 a year salaries, and what's expected of them, what their lives what their working hours will be like when they accept that sort of contract, and then balancing that with what seems to be now, relative to when I started writing about the law, much more of an interest in quality of life, like work-life balance issues, and there is obviously a conflict between you sup with the money bag city law firms, and you have to pay a price, And I suppose that's an issue for the younger generation. And I suppose the younger generation's more interested now in issues around climate change and diversity in inverted commas within their working environment. Yeah, so sort of arguably, lack of a better term, softer issues that wouldn't have been really an issue when I first started covering the law.
Just sort of to pivot slightly towards something that I guess I'm sort of interested in. How do you deal with something that comes to your desk that's quite controversial or involves a high profile thing?
Grab it quickly.
I know,
charge straight up to the news desk and say, we've got a good...
Have you got ethical considerations that you need to worry about?
Always have ethical considerations, but a good story, a controversial story is a good story. I mean, I don't mean to be flippant, but we're all about controversy. We want stories that keep people talking. We want stories that have, we love a row.
Yeah.
That's all good. I mean, obviously we have ethical considerations about everything we do, but we like stories that make people debate and talk and have emotional reactions to.
Yeah. I mean, are you concerned with the problem that maybe if you post one story and then suddenly it might pee off one of your sources elsewhere? Because this is something, my brother was a journalist for years, and this is something I argue with him a lot. He's like, you have to keep this very tight balance. And I'm like, no, you have to inform the public.
Well, I'm not obviously happy to discuss this with your brother, I think most of the people who speak to us and to me appreciate that we're in the business of reporting news. And, I mean, if I've got a close contact, when I report, I have contacts, but I don't have favorites, and I don't have people that I would necessarily protect people. We would write something about anyone really, even if they in the past had been a good source for a good contact. But I don't think it really comes up. We always protect sources, definitely, but that's great.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't, absolutely wouldn't shop a source on a story, but would we protect someone who'd been a source in the past from some, a story that exposes them for doing wrongdoing? I don't think so. Not at all. Maybe that's not exactly what you were asking, but.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
When it comes to those particular stories, are there any that stand out in your mind as being pivotal in your career?
Pivotal stories in my career. I've irritated people almost daily.
We did
a lot of good coverage during the pandemic on the, I say good coverage, I would say so myself. We did a lot of coverage, which I think other people thought was quite good, on the courts and during the pandemic, and how they were functioning, what the problems were, how the senior judiciary and the Ministry of Justice were trying to overcome them. We did a lot on that, and we've also done a lot on exposing the problems around the backlog of criminal trials and cases in the Crown Courts. And I'm pleased with, and I think others have recognized as well, that, I think arguably we've done more than anyone else in Fleet Street on looking at how the reasons behind the backlog should go back farther than predate the pandemic. Well, obviously exacerbated by the pandemic. And just the issues around the lack of investment in the criminal justice system, both in infrastructure terms and in terms of people. I think we've done a lot of that, which obviously doesn't make the Ministry of Justice very happy. They've written in the past to the editor, which I think is quite a good thing it's done.
When holding them to account,
exactly. If you're paying someone off, you're probably doing something right. It's probably a bit of a rude question to ask you, considering you're probably one of the most important legal sources in the UK. But how do you keep up to date with like legal news?
Well, as I say, there is no shortage of professional press or websites covering the law. And I mean, just to name, you'll know them as well. But I mean, apart from the obvious, professional press like still the Law Gazette, The Lawyer, Legal Week, which is now law.com, I think, and various others. There's also, there's great sort of gossip merchants. I'm probably doing them a disservice, but I'm very fond of them, like Legal Cheek, Roll on Friday. I mean, these, there's no shortage of that. Obviously, social media as well. I mean, some lawyers, and I think it's a minority, but but there are some very vocal lawyers on Twitter mostly. Mm-hmm. And it's always entertaining and potentially useful to keep track of that. But you must bear in mind that, and all the other, sadly, I suppose, relative to, again, when I first started, there's less just going out and meeting people. I still do. And the pandemic made a big dent in that because we were able to do it. But, there's a lot of legal social events and legal profession social events and events around the law. And, pre-pandemic, and when I first started, there was a lot, that's how you met people. It's just like, the old days when Fleet Street was Fleet Street, and you just meet people in the pubs and get decent, very good stories that way. There's less of that now because there's less time, because we're under such, pressure to turn so much around on a daily basis. But, there's still a lot going on around the law, and you can still meet people face to face, which is good now.
What current topics or trends do you think that someone at the start of their legal career should really keep their eye on?
So lawyers at the start of their career?
Yeah. Or students.
The thing about law is, obviously, as we said earlier, there's so many facets. So you could be, it depends on what sort of lawyer you want to be, obviously. If you're in the city, I suppose the interesting things now are the city's work of the city is very secular. There's a lot of concern now that there's going to be redundancies, some of the American law firms in the States have already started making some redundancies. Whether those will seep over to London is probably likely, but how widespread, who knows, and whether that then hits the domestic firms here in the square miles. That's an issue. I suppose if you want to start a career in crime, as it were, do you go to the bar? The bar used to be the sort of glamour side of criminal law practice, fostered by various fictional characters. But now the criminal bar's on its knees, that's a real issue. Pay is rubbish. There's an underlying, suggestion that the government's really looking to consolidate the practice of criminal defense work under, blending solicitor and barrister work to be more efficient. If you had any aspirations to be an old school high street solicitor, are those days, limited. There's so much specialization now, that a general practice law firm is almost non-existent. So, I don't mean to be downbeat on all of it. I'm sure, I suppose I think my advice to anyone starting out or students starting out would be try and work out what you want to do, what makes you, don't just think, I'll go and grab one of those £200,000 newly qualified jobs in the city because, it's a lot of money and I'll, be driving a Ferrari. If that's not going to make you happy, because there's a lot of miserable people in the city.
And if what would make them happy was to be a legal journalist, what would your advice be to them?
Well, it's a very fulfilling area to cover. So I would say go for it. And the routine used to be via local newspapers, but sadly local newspapers have their own problems now. I mean, there used to be the route in to Fleet Street generally. I did obviously take that route. And so and increasingly now Fleet Street draws on specialist trade publications to bring people. And there's still some come up via local papers, but, we have graduate schemes now and as well. So I would say that as I would just repeat, the benefit of covering the law is that you get to write about all sorts. You get to write about, I've even had a byline in the sports pages. So, you get, probably more than any other specialism in Fleet Street, you get to cover the wider spectrum.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very fair because I think law touches absolutely everything. So that does make sense. But I think the final question, the most important question we were asking everyone, did you ever imagine you'd end up where you are today?
Yeah, I always hoped. Like, I mean, there's no denying that it's a good job, and I still love it. Yeah, I always hope, but I mean,
it's a bit surreal just sitting here in the Times building.
Yeah, we should say we are in the Times.
Yeah, watching everyone walk past, and this is the hub of news.
We were sitting outside and saying how exciting to think about the stories that are breaking in this building right now and the little moments that are happening.
As who knows, you might be sat beside Peter Andre.
Yeah, John, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for asking me. It's been a pleasure.